Greetings and welcome to GatherVerse Summit. Beverly, good to
Hi,
see
Thomas.
you.
Good to see
Yeah,
you.
it's great. Same as well. It's been an amazing 2 days of the summit, and much has been said on the summit, and also much has been gained. And I want to say shout out to Lynn and the incredible panelists for starting off the day three summits. And here with me is Vivian Mitchell. It's an honor again to have you on the fireside. Thank you for joining in. A brief introduction about myself. I am Salvation Chigaroka. I'm a product operations manager at Each Blog, and I'm joining live from Lagos, Nigeria. So please kindly unmute your mic and give us a brief introduction about yourself. Tell us where you're joining from and what's inspiration to join She Summits.
So I'm joining you from South Africa. I'm currently in Durban on the East Coast. Originally from Cape Town. Moved to Durban about 2 months ago. Um, I'm I'm a storyteller healer. I work in the film and television industry. I've been in the industry for something like 32 years. Um, And so I'm kind of an elder now and see myself working with young people, particularly young women, to sort of train them how to understand story um, and how to be the voice of the voiceless of the next generation. Because in many
Mm.
ways, in our industry and the stories that we tell, our women's stories are still very much sidelined and they are voiceless.
That's very beautiful. It's good to have the wisdom of the elders, and that's why we're happy to have you join us today. I personally love the theme of today's fireside chat, the stories we become. And to just begin us with, I'd like for you to share with us what's the importance of women telling their stories globally. You've been around since the early 90s. I'm sure you have a lot to share on this.
I think the importance of is just solidarity. I think that the more we learn of women's stories in other parts of the world, and we share those stories, we we grow solidarity. And right now, in the world that we find ourselves in, which is incredibly toxic and incredibly patriarchal and combative, um, we need that kind of storytelling solidarity across, I mean, the globe, not just the global south, but I think the north as well, in that women should come together and understand that our situations are not unique. I think often in our individual capacities in our own countries, we think women have it better elsewhere. Um, but then when you work with women I mean, I recently was running writers' rooms and stuff in the Caribbean, and was quite surprised to see how um, women had to fight to be heard, you know. And so I think it's important that as storytellers, we share our experiences, and in so doing, also collaborate and bring in the expertise of people from other women from other parts of the world who can help us enhance the stories that we tell to reach a global audience.
Right, right. I totally agree with you on that. Thank you very much for articulating that with clarity and explaining that very well. I also believe storytelling helps to shape how women understand themselves. And this
Yes.
this will bring me to ask on how does storytelling influence identity, memory, and belonging for women across generations and geographies.
So when I saw that question, I couldn't help but laugh because, my background is that I was a anti-apartheid activist. I fought in the liberation struggle against apartheid back in the 70s
Wow.
and 80s. I was a
That's
full-on
beautiful.
combatant, a real militant.
Oh.
And our, I spent some time in prison as well, and that taught me a lot as a woman to find my interior core of resilience, Um,
Hmm.
but I remember being told that our struggle is against white people, against a white oppressor.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
used to say, yes, but the first oppression that I know and that I could acknowledge was that of a young girl, of being a woman, of being told, shut up, you're too talkative, you talk too native, and fighting to have my voice heard as a woman, not just as a black woman, but as a woman. And I think telling stories, for example, I'm currently trying to um, archive stories from history of women hidden in history, in Africa, um, because there are so many incredible stories of women that have gone before us. But
Yes.
because we don't, storytelling needs to help, particularly for this young generation who are being bombarded by often the most negative stereotypes of women. I mean, we're living in information overload, and I feel so sorry for young people who don't have the tools to um, be able to, separate what is important for them to sort of take from something, or just be sort of overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that's coming at them. So I think in terms of identity, I'm using storytelling to tell the stories of resilient women from slavery in Africa, in South Africa. So few people know that South Africa had slavery. It's the only country in Africa where slaves were actually brought to, not taken from. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
and telling those stories. So it's healing. I think that storytelling heals identity. It heals memory. It brings you a sense of self. It gives you a sense of being able to navigate your way in the world because you are strengthened through
Mm-hmm.
stories. And so those of us who are the creators of stories have to become far more vigilant, because it's almost a sacred task in that you have, at any given time, you could possibly have 4 million people watching the story that you're telling. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, I'm also trying to teach students, when I teach, that there's a spiritual obligation, almost in a way, of being very, and sacred, of being very vigilant in terms of the
Right.
way we portray, particularly women, in the
Right.
stories that we tell. Currently in South Africa, for example, I'm horrified at how young women themselves portray women in the stories that they tell. The
Mm-hmm.
scheming bitch, the woman that's going to take your husband. And I often find, and for me, it's also to understand that there are young men who are in touch with their feminine. And so I think it's important also through stories to give that sense of identity to both young men and young women, in terms of what are the issues that young women in this very patriarchal, gender-based violence society of South Africa, for example, that we live in, how do we
Mm-hmm.
rise above that? But I think at the same time as we're trying to empower women, we should also be educating young men.
Yeah, right. I totally agree with you on that. And thank you very much for sharing a part of your story about the resilience times in the 70s. I really appreciate you sharing that on this Fireside Chat, because that means a lot more for myself, the younger generation coming up. I look up to people like you, Beverly, who is championing the stories that are part of our identity as Africans, as women globally. And it's a power for us, and it's a shared goal that we keep the stories alive. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. I'd like for us to shift a little bit from culture now to the industry for a moment. How do women storytellers protect authenticity while navigating funding, co-production, and the global market pressure?
I think it's by having a very clear understanding of what the story is that they're pitching, right? I
Mm,
often find that um, I'm having to do a lot of training with young women to train them how to articulate when they pitch, when they have to stand in front of people and pitch their stories.
mm,
Um, there's also that sense of teaching a woman to be confident, but I would say collaboration is, for me, the most important thing. Is I'm often nurturing younger female filmmakers, standing with them on these platforms to give them that kind of courage. And then me, myself, wanting to work with more experienced storytellers from the US or from Europe or from Africa, you know.
mm,
So we need to be building those blocks of collaboration and participation and partnering, you know, in terms of getting those stories across, because and also being very careful in
yeah,
how you go about raising your funding. Who are your investors? Don't
mm,
just rather walk away from an investor that's going to force you to change your story
mm-hmm,
and see it as bums on seats than trying to prevent you from telling the authentic story. So I think you've also got to learn to be tough and walk away from money that can possibly compromise the story that you want to tell.
hmm, Thank you for sharing that authentic story. Bold, and thank you very much for sharing that. I'm really enjoying this fireside chat. We don't have much time on our hands, and I'll just quickly go into the next question. How does leading scripted development? You've been in this industry. You've been a very influential person on the storytelling part in the industry. I want to ask, how does it influence women's voices? How does it influence both the women who are seen on screen and the ones unseen?
I think it starts with story, right?
Mm,
So in that writer's room, when you're sitting there, I recently worked with a group of Nigerian female writers. One of the most incredible experiences that I had, um, where we had to learn to focus on the story that we were telling and not ego, right? And I think it's
mm,
so important that when we are um, trying to tell these stories, that we focus on what is the story that I'm wanting to tell. What's the moral tale that I'm telling?
mm,
And I think women
mm,
are far more adept at getting into the emotional heartbeat of stories. And so
mm,
it's about not just um, you know the final thing that we see, but the actual or the cast or the crew that we get. But when it starts with that idea that you're turning
yeah.
into a story, and you're sitting in those writers' rooms and we working out what's our arc across the episodes or what's our arc across the feature film, is getting
Mm,
in touch with that nuances and those anecdotal um, techniques of what makes women tick. That we have to start presenting women as authentic with flaws. Um, Women don't have to be glamorous and beautiful, and and this is what really works on my nerves about the current thing, is that women have to look so good on television. They've got to be thin, they've got to be
the perfect figure.
exactly, and create characters that women globally can relate to, and it
Right.
starts in that writer's room when you're working and you're developing your story, because all of it is about the script. At the end of the day, the script is the most important thing, and that is the story that you're telling.
Thank you. Thank you. A lot of time is not on the side. I really would have looked forward to having more of this conversation on future She Summits and even this year, other summits coming up. Would love to see you join us again, Beverly. And
Yes,
thank you very much for sharing so much with us for the work you do with young women out there. And thank you for being an inspiration to this generation. It was lovely having you on this Fireside channel. And see you next time. Bye, Beverly. Agada was well.
thank you so much, and thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Bye bye.
Bye.